who's done some fabulous work on empathy and machines, and let him say a little bit about himself.
Hello. Just want to see how loud that is. And so I'm Matt Farber. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Northern Colorado. I guess we have a longer form introduction.
Sure.
Sure. This is my second tech conference, so I'm a veteran. I know where all the bathrooms are. And I'll talk a little bit more, though, in the longer part.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Over to Susanna Polak, who's president for Games for Change.
Hi, I'm Susanna Polak. I'm president of Games for Change, based in New York. First time here in India, and I'm very excited to be part of this event. It comes for me full circle, having worked in children's media for many, many years, now working in games, and to be able to put the games back with children and the impact that that can have around their social emotional learning is amazing. But I'm going to talk more about my background during my slides.
Sure. Over to Sean Young, who's CEO and co-founder of Classcraft.
My name is Sean. Hi, everybody. I'm from Canada, and I'm the CEO of a company called Classcraft. And what we're doing is the world's largest scale implementation using games for social emotional learning in the classroom. And I'll be talking about that and the approach that we've had in terms of bridging the divide between physical learning and digital learning, and how we can use game mechanics to develop collaboration and social emotional development in children.
Then over to Kelly Dunlap, who's a developmental psychologist with a great interest in socio-emotional learning. So basically, I want to table for you that we tried to bring in all the different stakeholders who go on to form this space in terms of developers, learners, implementers, psychologists, and I hope to have an interesting discussion. Kelly.
Hello, as you mentioned, my name is Dr. Kelly Dunlap. I am a psychologist, I'm a game designer, and I work as the manager of mental health research and design at a nonprofit called I Thrive Games, where we're trying to help games help people live better lives. So I'll say more later.
Thank you. So I will do a short, maybe 2-3 slide induction on contextualizing socio-emotional learning, just to make sure that everybody is familiar with what we are talking about and why socio-emotional learning, or SEL as it's now called, is so much in discussion these days. Akriti, can we have a set of slides? Okay. So I'm going to stand up there because it's just a little easier to see them. So here are the two things we are going to talk about. If I take a sort of a triangular approach, socio-emotional skills and digital games or digital pedagogies is what we want to combine, and we want to try and impact learning. So that's why this whole discussion began, and I think Ananta already started it in the morning today. The brain has two primary regions, or you can broadly think of the capabilities to be classified as the thinking brain and the emotional brain. Okay? And they are always at work whenever we do any decision making, any action that we do. But a lot of our education systems have primarily focused on trying to build skills in thinking skills or rational skills, and there's very little work that has gone on to show or has focused on trying to have socio-emotional learning in the classroom. But a wealth of neuroscience research in the last 15 years or so has brought to fore the fact that unless these socio-emotional circuits, which are listed out here, okay, in the other, so the non-red part of the brain actually play an important role in learning and decision making. So you might be running a fantastic classroom, but if the child sitting in your classroom is terrified, or is often even hungry, or has just gotten a beating outside, or is afraid of being bullied when he steps out of the classroom, so something that's going to happen later, there's very little that he's going to learn in the classroom. Okay? And this happens to children as young as 2 to 3 years of age. Okay? So clearly we need to make our classrooms more socially and emotionally secure, okay? And make sure that they are connected so that learning can actually happen. That's the reason why children come to school. Okay? So it's important that these become part of our curricular systems. Doesn't have to specifically always be a class socio-emotional learning, but one of the ideas that we also want to promote is to say that socio-emotional learning should become part of all curricula. So we are also running another session, for instance, on how socio-emotional learning skills can be integrated into math and science classes too. Okay. So that's really the premise of it, is how do we try and make sure that we try and address the thinking brain and the emotional brain. And we're talking a lot about 21st century skills, okay? So what are the kinds of socio-emotional skills that we're talking about? I've listed a few, and you will see across the course of the afternoon that there will be many more that will get added to this list, okay? But you want to be able to teach students on how to, we call it emotional literacy now, and understand what's happening with them. So if they learn how to name their emotions, they can also develop strategies on how to handle those emotions. How it helps, how socio-emotional learning helps goal setting, how important it is for the teacher and the learner to be on the same empathetic plane. So we recognize that this should consciously come into classrooms. And finally, all these skills go on to play an important role in responsible decision making. And we do want that our students should be able to make responsible decisions as they get older and out into the world. Okay. So this is this broad gamut of human skills which are all important for life but are not taught in classrooms. And if we begin to bring in socio-emotional learning into classrooms, we hopefully will be adding in to a lot better understanding and skilling our children to be able to do this. Okay? So it's clearly something that's very important. It might be one of the reasons why you made an emotional decision to even attend this session. After all, you took a decision across 5 other sessions to come for this. Okay? So decision making is something that you do all the time, and the emotions are clearly playing a role for that. So having set the stage for that, I'm now going to invite Matthew Farber to tell us about what he has learned and wants to contribute to the field of CL using games. Matthews?
Yes.
Okay. Go on.
Hello. Good afternoon. So I'm Matthew Farber. That's my contact information and Twitter. So I am a assistant professor of technology, innovation, and pedagogy, and I've been writing about the intersection of really good teaching and really good games, what that looks like in the classroom, an overview of game-based learning, as well as how teachers use games in the classroom. And teachers, really good teachers, are using really good games, not as teaching machines, where the game is actually the teacher. Rather, they're using game as media, the way you would use documentary film or literary fiction, with students reading the game as digital text, analyzing it, deconstructing how it works, and then making their own games as systems. And you know, that's really where I see the most exciting learning happening. Last year, I co-authored this paper with Dr. Karen Schreier for MGIEP, and Karen and I have 2 papers after this that we submitted, and I think 2 more to go, and a book proposal as well. So anyway, we're continuing this work here. We're thinking about how games can be used and not used well as teaching empathy, or evoking empathy from players, and how that may or may not work. Some of the things in the paper we looked at, though, are what's unique to games, such as player agency, which is the perception that you have control over the experience, even though in games choices are somewhat limited, but those choices might inform emotions. Games have a unique set of emotions, different than other media. Because you control the experience, because you have agency, you would feel emotions such as guilt or pride or shame through playing a game. And in research, emotions of guilt may affect one's ability to have empathy. But games are themselves a closed system. So, you know, there's a lot of mediation and learning that goes around that in classrooms. So a little bit about my journey into this field. I was a middle school teacher for a decade. I used games in the classroom. And I was what's called a constructionist gamer. So my students would make games after they played games. That's how they learned. And currently I'm thinking about different ways that games can evoke social emotional learning, particularly empathy. Empathy is a tricky thing because empathy does not necessarily mean that you're led to a morally correct or a morally sound decision. There's also evidence that empathy may lead people to not act as compassion would. So perhaps compassion is something that should be tied to empathy. But again, I'm a constructionist gamer, so I'm in the School of Teacher Education. I'm also on the Interactive Fiction Technology Foundation Education Committee. This is a free application called Twine, where you make the choose your own adventure style stories. This is a undergraduate teacher educator who created a coming out simulator using Twine. So this is where I find empathy to be really embedded. But Karen and my research is showing that there is cognitive and affective empathy, which is difficult to disentangle. But there are also many other types of empathy which tend to get generalized, such as historical empathy, feeling how people felt in the past, or cultural empathy, or human-centered design empathy when we make a product for somebody. Those are not exactly the same. It's quite a nuanced field. And currently, I should also close out my little section here by stating that I do have a bit of a connection to everybody in the panel. Aside from speaking a few times at Games for Change and using Classcraft in the classroom, I'm working with iThrive, which is Kelly's organization, developing curriculum around serious games such as this one here, which is What Remains of Edith Finch, where students don't just play the game and we don't just assume that they pick up empathy from playing the game, but they have to construct personally meaningful artifacts that really enforce what they're learning as the game as digital text. So with that, I will hand this over to Susanna, who is from Games for Change, and this won Games for Change, right?
Yes, it won Games for Change Game of the Year this past year. So hello, I'm Susanna Pollock, President of Games for Change. If you're not familiar with the organization, we're a not-for-profit that just celebrated our 15th year. We do a number of things, but our mission is to empower social innovators and game creators to use digital games to drive real-world impact. And we do this across a number of programs. Our biggest is the Games for Change Festival, but we also work with building arcades, student programs, which we'll talk about in a second. But the concept that games have a power beyond entertainment because of the nature of game mechanics, by giving the player agency and a sense to identify with the characters in a story, the material that's being conveyed, and for all the reasons that we're sitting here today to talk about games and education. Our main event is the Games to Change Festival. It takes place in the summer. It's where I met Nandini. At that event, we focus on 3 main tracks, one of which is the Games for Learning Summit that started with the U.S. Department of Education 5 years ago. We also focus on games in health and wellness, games that can make us feel better physically and rehabilitation, dealing with PTSD, as well as cognitive developments. And then we also have a focus on games and social issues, ways games can raise awareness around humanitarian issues like those wicked problems that we're talking about earlier. We also have the XR for Change Summit, which I think is also very relevant in our conversation over the next 2 days. We've expanded our work to include VR and AR and MR, just as game developers have expanded their work into these fields as a new platform which to tell their stories and develop their interactive medium. But also government agencies, non-for-profits, education systems are also turning to this medium. So we have an opportunity to explore that cross-discipline public and private sectors as part of that event. We also create immersive arcades and game arcades. We just came back from Bahrain as UNESCO had a youthful festival there focusing on youth from 18 to 25. And we created a VR experiences, one for every sustainable development goal. So there were 17 different experiences. It was quite a great project. And finally, the National Student Challenge, where we invite students to become creators, to make digital games, starting from scratch and growing up to Unity, around social issues. So combining that civic engagement with this opportunity to develop SEL and STEM skills, which is a fantastic program run in 4 cities around the country. So here at Tech 2018, I'm here to talk about SEL skills and digital games. Can students learn SEL skills from digital games? I'll leave to the educators and psychologists to talk about why and how, but I'm going to give you a bit of an overview of what we do, of what's out there in the market that weren't necessarily designed, games that weren't designed to have an educational impact, but do because of the nature of which the engagement allows. The first I'm going to talk about is the Walking Dead game, which by all intents and purposes is not a learning game or a social impact game. However, through the kind of gameplay that they have and the story that they tell, it is one that drives empathy, that helps the creator go through experiences as they role play to decide on what kind of character, what kind of hero the main character is going to be. And if you go to, I added a link here of gamesandImpact.org, which is not my organization, that's at ASU, Arizona State University. They've created they call them impact guides for both players and teachers to use to walk through, very much like the work that I think that you are starting to do with Edith Finch, to very curriculum around them to encourage the player to think about these issues about developing empathy through the game. Fortnite, which I think we'll talk about in a little bit too, for better or for worse, as many of our kids or ourselves are playing it, helps develop a number of skills. One of them is interdependence, and as you are collaborating with your partners to make your way through the game. Other games that are out there that has a bit more attention into it is a game like Life is Strange, which also won a Game of the Year award at Games for Change. And in this game that deals a lot with very serious issues, anxiety, depression, suicide, it gives a player the ability to model behavior and to try different outcomes. In this game in particular, there's a wonderful mechanic where the main character can actually reverse time. And by being able to time travel allows you as a player to try out different outcomes to the game. Finally, an example is Journey, which is a kind of a very slow-paced game, slow simulation I think we were talking about earlier, and it helps you, the player, with nonverbal communication, how you can sing to the objects and the characters in the game and move forward in that game. And there's another impact guide that's available through ASU on that as well. Now, going a little bit younger, we have 2 games, Pokemon Go, which has proven to offer a lot of benefits to people as they play, not only to collect their Pokemons and hatch and all the great things you can do, but it's community building, but it also helps with resilience with kids and to continue to strive not only to get out from their basements maybe and walk a dog in order to collect their eggs, but also to understand that there are, if they persist, they are able to achieve the rewards that the game offers. And finally, Big Bird's Comfy Cozy Nest, which is a Sesame Street game that was designed to help emotional regulation, particularly with young children who experience trauma. It's a very simple interactive game that helps young people create a safe zone and understand what it's like to calm yourself down and get yourself back into a place of calmness and peace to deal with whatever situation you're dealing with. And I think, so those are my examples about games that are out there that have a impact value around SEL. I think we'll hear more about games that are intentionally designed to help develop these skills, and I'll hand this over to Sean. Who's getting the applause? Sean, are you
for
and
you,
me?
it's
But
for
that's
you.
okay.
Hey everybody, my name is Sean. I am the co-founder and CEO of Classcraft. And Classcraft is a very unique approach to leveraging game mechanics to teach social emotional learning in school. And really the way that we're approaching things is Classcraft is, I was a teacher for 10 years and went on to build Classcraft for myself. And really the goal was to address these massive issues that we have in education by attacking systemic disengagement. So looking at how we can drive engagement in the classroom, and from there do things like teach social emotional learning, bring in curriculum, help students with bullying issues. We had a whole one-year clinical trial in schools where we looked at like how you could use Classcraft to prevent bullying. So really tackling these issues, but really always from an engagement perspective. So if we can leverage kids' engagement, make them care about being in school, help them care about being in school, we can solve these critical issues. And so the idea with Classcraft is to make school into a game. And so a lot of, when we think about games in education, we're often thinking about like either using commercial video games in the classroom or developing games to teach specific subjects, like a math game, for example. The idea with Classcraft is really to say, school itself should be the game. School is a system. It's a designed experience where we're putting students into a collaborative or a common experience which has rules. But if we were to think about making that system into more of a game-like format, what could we achieve? And so when we look at like social emotional learning, the things that we're able to do is leverage student engagement, motivation, develop social emotional skills by playing the game, reward students for social emotional outcomes, and then from there go on to assess. A lot of the idea around social emotional learning in digital games that already exist is that you can develop, like Susanna was showing examples of how you can develop certain social emotional skills, but you're not necessarily assessing them. So Classcraft actually has an assessment engine built into it as well. And so the way that it works is like teachers will teach the way they normally teach, and while school is happening, they'll be giving kids points. So they'll give points for general things like you handed in your homework time, you're being collaborative, you're being inclusive. And then when we look at like social emotional outcomes, it'll be things like you named emotions properly, you navigated that emotion, you were able to collaborate and build a trustful dynamic with your peers. And so students earn points for that. There's like a whole curricular piece that is beyond the scope of this discussion, but that like ties into other parts of learning. And then finally like goes all the way down into the classroom. And this is a school-wide rollout in a school in Spain where the entire school is partaking in Classcraft and manifests itself into a giant dance battle. And so the types of ways that we're looking at that is really looking at like how can we bring in parents into the game experience? How can from there teachers drive social emotional outcomes by integrating those rubrics directly into classroom management? So a lot of the other challenges around social emotional learning is that for teachers it's extra work, right? It's not actually part of the curriculum. How can we help teachers to streamline that experience and bring it into their general practice? And so Classcraft really helps for that. And then connecting that, as I was mentioning, to the curriculum. And so when teachers are playing Classcraft in the classroom, they'll be giving students points for things like, naming your emotions, showing empathy, showing respect, being inclusive, all these different objectives and values that we have here at MGIP, but also that are part of social learning frameworks, like CASEL, for example, in the US. And so what's happening here is really fascinating because, as kids play Classcraft, they level up, they unlock, cool powers like being able to in class, hand in their assignments a day, like things matter to them. But what you're doing here is leveraging student engagement. They really want these points, so much so that they're like dressing up as their characters at school. And you're developing it because you're giving them points for that. You're incentivizing them. Every time they exhibit these behaviors, they get points. And then you're able to assess it. And so when we look at, like, we have a whole set of analytics tools for school administrators. And so we work with schools and school districts and school boards. We're able to report on this data, both to teachers, parents, students, and school administrators, and help them see how social emotional learning is developing in the classroom holistically, like the whole building, like we're able to measure school climate in real time, all the way down to a specific student. And this is really important because it's one thing to model social emotional learning in a game. It's another one to intentionally develop it and then intentionally assess it. And if we're not doing assessment and we're not doing intentional development, then you could say that we're not intentionally teaching it. And so as we think about how we're using games and these different digital mediums to drive social emotional learning, there's really this idea of how do we bring it into the classroom in a way that's like tied to educational models. So these are some examples of how we're able to use the data, we're able to see which rubrics are coming out most often. So these could be, you could imagine here things like showing empathy, showing inclusiveness. You could see how those things are trending in a building. You could also see how negative behavior is trending. So seeing how students are off task or are not doing these things. Like, for example, in the bullying study, we were giving kids points for being inclusive or including people in their teams that they normally wouldn't work with, and removing health points for being rude and mean to other kids. And so we're able to see how these rubrics are trending through time and see the impact of the gameplay and the teacher's modeling of that behavior through time on these behavioral outcomes for kids. And so just a thought about what is Classcraft, how big is it? Classcraft's in 75 countries. We have 5 million kids in the platform right now. So all over the world playing this game experience across, grades that are as low as, 3rd grade, 4th grade, all the way through university students like Matt in Matt's class. And really teachers are creating models outside of the platform. So things like building their own map universes, students creating their own costumes of these characters. And so it really becomes this pervasive experience that takes over the classroom. Luckily for us, there's a ton of research about Classcraft as well. This is a quote from a study that was done around Classcraft's SEL effectiveness by Dr. Elias from the Rutgers School of Social Emotional Learning. And it's interesting because we're now at a place where research showing that these types of game approaches can really have an impact around these outcomes that we're looking for. If you want to find more research about that, you can go to classcraft.com/research. So this is my info. If you want to connect, you can reach out to me. You can find out about how we're looking at social emotional learning on our website. And I will now hand it over to Kelly, who's going to talk to you about the psychology work that she's doing.
All right, hi everybody. That's my information up there if you'd like it. So like I mentioned, I work at iThrive Games, and we're a nonprofit that focuses on making games and trying to integrate SEL into those games in a variety of different ways. So, for example, we work with educators like Matt, as well as educators and mental health professionals to take existing games and try and pull important themes out of them to use in their class. So whether you're doing What Remains of Edith Finch and you're talking about empathy and death positivity, or if you take a game like any of them on the Games for Change site, and how you can pull those out and look at those themes and apply them either in a therapeutic setting like I do, or in an educational setting to really get at those kinds of social and emotional skills. But we also work with game developers, so from indie all the way up to AAA studios, on how we can build games better so that we can get these kinds of experiences in those games. So we have some things that we've developed are some game guide kits that we give to developers. So if you wanted to say, create a game that evoked a sense of empathy in the player, we literally have a kit that will walk you through that process of here are the things to do, here are the mechanics, here are the kinds of narratives, here's the kind of environments and settings that you can use to get those kinds of feelings and sensations across. And then we have them for a bunch of different SEL skills. So there's empathy, communication, cooperation is another one we have. Zest, we even have Zest, because a lot of them are based in the positive psychology movement. And the thing I think I find most exciting is that all of these kits that we design and pretty much everything we do at iThrive is empirically based, or at least based on the evidence and research from education, from mental health, and other social science fields. So really excited to be here and to talk about social emotional learning. I'm excited that it's a topic that's elevated enough to be on this stage. And I'll just keep it short and sweet because I really want to get to the discussion questions that we have. But yeah, that's my information. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. So I have the clock ticking here, but I just want to quickly spend maybe 3 minutes and not more than that. I had planned to do about 5, but tell you a little bit about how we are using not games specifically, but a larger digital platform which we talked about this morning, Kai, to focus on socio-emotional learning. And to also tell you there are going to be 2 specific sessions on that. Akriti, could we have those slides, please? On 2 programs, one which we call Libre. So Libre is focused on building the skills of critical inquiry, mindfulness, empathy, and compassion. So the idea is to build skills of socio-emotional learning with a very conscious element of inquiry also built in. And the knowledge skills that we will bring in is a curriculum on global citizenship. So the idea is to use the knowledge building for discussions like identity, extremism, violence, to actually engage in those discussions so that they're better understanding. But in the course of these discussions, to also expose children to these ideas of empathy and compassion building. And there's going to be a session on this on the 17th. So I hope to spend a little bit of time going through that in view of the time that we are spending. I'll just quickly run you through it. But the idea is to use, for instance, dialogue driven through comic strips to also begin to get children to interact with each other. In the process also begin to decide how there can be situations where you can agree to disagree. Okay? So develop some level of perspective taking too. To bring in, to use videos, like one for teaching mindfulness. And this is something I'm going to come back and take back to the panelists later on, is what a challenge it has been to be able to find good games that build feelings of mindfulness, which also we believe are part of socio-emotional learning. So how can we begin to engage in that? But having gone through an interaction or an exercise in doing mindfulness, how it's also important to have children begin to do reflection, okay? Because when you begin to think about how you're exactly feeling, it also helps you recognize what kind of an emotional state you might be in, so do some self-reflection and to begin to document that. And as they document it, you go back and do some of the sentiment analysis that was talked about for the child to begin to try and understand what he or she is going through, whether they agree or disagree. So the grounding of state of coming back to baseline is something that's been found to be extremely useful in any learning process, and it's children and adults who both benefit from it. Okay. So we've brought in things like getting children to make difficult decisions in cases of citizenship where you're trying to match the following supposedly, but to also take a call between premise and conclusion. Okay? So how it gets children to start beginning to think about decision-making skills. Okay? So this is all going to be discussed in great detail in the program on Libre, which is on the 17th, and I have details on that. So I'll stop on the Libre part of it right now, but to tell you that the idea is to use different environments, to come back to the point that was made earlier by Sean, to build engagement in students, and in the process begin to realize that skills of empathy, attention, and compassion are something that we need to consciously begin to talk about in our classrooms. And some of these platforms might emerge as exciting ways to try and do this. So that's when the Libre session is scheduled. A second program that we also do is called DICE, which is called Digital Intercultural Exchange. We've run this in the past for, it's gone through 2 phases. And the young lady who directed that is sitting in the audience, Aditi, and she's doing a session on this right after this session. And the idea is to use the digital platform to have children across the world talk to each other. Okay? So for those of you who were there in the morning, you saw a little film that was made by children who interacted through this. So for about 8 weeks, they talked to each other. These were kids from South Africa, India, Malaysia, the United States, and Norway. And they talk to each other about various things. And the next program that's going to begin is one on the idea of home, okay? And how the idea of home has undergone a very big change because of all the issues on migration that we are seeing. Okay? So to get children to talk about what their concept of home is, but in the course of that discussion, begin to understand how cultures are different, how people's concept of homes are different, and how people's concepts of homes are varying because the environment is changing so much. And it's through that we also find, and this has been backed up by some research which we did using a game, to see how children actually begin to, this platform of exchange begins to build collaborative communication and empathetic skills in children. So just using digital platforms more imaginatively also offers us now an avenue to begin to build some of these skills on SEL learning. Okay? So go to Aditi's session 2 if you can, and you'll get a little more understanding of this too. And these are the details on the session. Just forget about the time. It's the session exactly after this. It's a breakout session, but she can actually tell you about how this platform could be used, and if you want any of your schools to participate, how you can come back and talk to her. But let me instead now move on to the questions that we had wanted to sort of bring up for discussion, and I'm going to start out with Kelly, because we've been talking so much about evidence. Kelly, is there enough research evidence to support that socio-emotional learning can be built through games and digital curricula?
So as a researcher, I don't think there's ever enough research or enough evidence. But in general, from what is out there and what is available, yes, there's a lot of evidence of game-based learning as being an efficacious method for teaching a variety of different skills. Most of the research has exclusively focused on STEM skills, so making games to help kids learn math or science or technology. And one of the reasons that's so kind of been attractive is that those subjects are very conducive to making a system. Like, in fact, there is a right and a wrong answer. In science, there are procedures that you go through. And when you're building a game, you need those kinds of certainties in order to capture it. So it makes a lot of sense. In terms of specifically of game-based learning for SEL, there's a lot less research, but it does, what's available does indicate that it is an effective tool when used. But there definitely needs to be more, and especially if you're looking at specific populations such as adolescents. So I Thrive, we focus mostly on teens. And the amount of literature about game-based learning for SEL for teens, if I remember my paper right, I think we found 2 studies. That's it. That actually called out teens and called out game-based learning for SEL. So there's a lot more that can be done and needs to be done, but what is out there, it does look promising, and it's definitely something worth pursuing.
Thank you. So, Sean, what do you think are the greatest challenges that we face in embedding socio-emotional games in school systems?
I think there's several challenges. I think that when we think about actually using commercial games, there's hardware and distribution issue that is massive, and that's actually been slowing down the push of games in education in general. If you need a PlayStation to play this game, then you need 30 PlayStations for 30 kids. The budgetary constraints around that are pretty massive. The push that we've had is very cloud-based and runs in a browser, so we've kind of circumvented that. I would say that the another piece is like as we think about using games for social emotional learning, we have to be cognizant and conscientious of what's happening around and outside the game. You know, the game is only one part of the experience. Actually interfacing with the other kids that are playing the game at the same time as you, intentionally teaching to the game. Like you could, for example, imagine a gaming experience that has you living some very negative emotions, and that can actually be conducive to learning about emotions and naming them, etc. But you need to like teach around that, and you need to build intentional lesson design around those specific experiences. So I think that there's like, just like any other medium, like for example, you could watch Schindler's List in a history class and learn about the Holocaust. Well, you actually need to teach around that. So I think that it's not like, oh, we'll just like throw in these games and people will learn this. We actually need to be intentional about how we're teaching it. And then as I was mentioning earlier, assessing. I think one of the challenges as well around assessment is that teachers don't know how to do it. You know, like how do you actually evaluate those things is, you know, you can't do multiple choice questions around social emotional development. You have to have like skill-based assessment. You have to have like mastery levels, and you have to have standards. And these are things that are emerging and that exist, but that most practitioners don't know about and don't know how to implement. So I think there's actually like several challenges structuring around how we actually implement rather than the actual medium itself.
So I want to come back to a point that you had actually raised yesterday at the high-level policy forum when we were talking about these. Well, not really. So one of the things that you mentioned was that there aren't enough games that have curriculum content built into them. Okay, and not just you. I'd like anybody, any of the panelists to contribute this. Because if we are beginning to seriously talk about games getting included into curricula or into classroom settings, a question that governments and curriculum makers and school education systems are going to ask us is, so if I decide to replace my history course with a game, can you assure me that this is going to teach about, you know, World War I and World War II? So are there people you think who are getting into this, or is there something that we need to start consciously working about? Because we're talking about skill maps as well as knowledge maps, both emerging out of such curricula. And feel free to go. So Matthew wants to take a shot at it first.
Sure. Well, I think we should look at games as nuanced media. So, you know, just like there are different types of novels and different types of film, there are many, many different types of games. And when we look at games, you know, what can games do? Well, there are certain types of games. We call them walking simulators. There's slower paced games. There's story-driven games. Walled in a Game is one example, which Henry David Thoreau's books. And you are there at Walden Pond. And you know, there are games like that I feel are not really educational technology. We use educational technology and computational literacy to bring games to the classroom. It was a nice convergence, and all the conversations stopped there. I feel that there are certain categories of games, certain genres of games that are more like film and more like books that can be close read and analyzed. And you know, if I was going to stream from Netflix a documentary film using technology here, I don't think about that as educational technology. I think about that as a documentary that may move certain emotions. If I played Up right now, the beginning of Pixar's Up, right? We will empathize with those digital on-screen characters in the first 20 minutes. No spoiler alerts, I think the movie's been out long enough, right? But it's set to tug on the heartstrings to transport you, it's called transportation theory, into the fictional world. And games do that really well. Where I find a little troubling is where games are intentionally doing this. You know, we don't do this with books. We teach commercial books, books that are off the shelf. We don't teach with books that are intentionally designed to evoke, you know, social awareness, for example. Well, sometimes, but not often.
So I think you made a really important point there, and I agree with you, Matt, about games that can be treated as other forms of media, the way that graphic novels can address serious subjects like the Holocaust with Art Spiegelman's Mouse, or popular documentaries like Morgan Spurlock's Super Size Me, right? There are different ways to enter into serious subjects using different media, and games can do that. I also think that there is a great library of games that are intentionally designed to have an outcome, and have curriculum built into it so it can be used in the classroom. Science and math, for certainly STEM games are designed like that. But there are also curriculum that are built. There's curriculum built around games that offer as teacher guides, right? Like the ones that you guys you're doing. And I forgot to mention on my little intro is that we do have a digital arcade of over 200 games on the Games Change website, which is often used by educators to identify games by subject area. So we do have games about the environment, games about climate change, and we do rank them age appropriateness. So I can't say that all those games on there have a curriculum built into it, but it's a good resource to identify.
I think like our approach around games has really been around how to develop skills, and I think that games in general are really effective at doing that, because the game design pushes you to develop, like most game will push you to develop certain skills to get through the game, and game gets harder and harder as you go. Not these walking games, but a lot of games. I think like when we look at, so there's this question of like, what is our learning intention? What is our teaching intention? And if our intention is to, for example, in the STEM curriculum, teach things like problem solving, teach these skills or, more analytical thinking, or, hypothesis building, games are really effective at doing that because of the interactive nature of them. When we think about like, oh, well, I want to teach the laws, like Newton's 3 laws in a game, there's a different challenge there around design thinking around the game, and you get caught up in these really pernicious situations. Like an example that I like to, there's this game called Spore, and in Spore you start off as like a unicellular organism, and you evolve, and then you like build up your life form, and then you leave the water, and you become like a mammal, and then you can always like evolve your creature. And so they use Spore to teach evolution theory. And when they tested the kids after 2 weeks of playing Spore, what it had actually taught them was creationism, because it was like there's an intelligent being guiding evolution, the player, and really like the learning outcome of the game was like the complete opposite of what they were trying to teach, even though it had like this very curricular play in it. And so I think that like when you design games for curriculum, there's like a danger there around the model that you're creating. Like if you were to think a history game and build simulations, if the simulation is too simple, then you're simplifying history. And if the game is too complicated, then you're like, you're beyond kids' zone of proximal development. So there's this whole like very tricky piece around build curriculum in games that I think is hard to scale. It's hard to do that at like a massive scale. And so our approach has really been around how do we develop skills, cognitive skills, social emotional skills, communication and collaboration skills.
So in the spirit of engagement, how many of you play games? Raise your hands. Okay, so we have roughly maybe about 40%, right? You can just play games.
Board games count.
Yeah.
I think the rest.
And then we can go to digital games.
And mobile games count.
Yeah.
Candy
So
Crush
mobile
counts.
games, computer games, whatever. iPad and mobile games, I guess, are the same. So just to get a feel for how engaged you are in terms of the field of gaming is what I was trying to get a feeling for. And how many of you have children who play games? That should have had more hands going up, I thought. Anyway.
Children.
So, given that we just have 5 minutes, 40 seconds left for the session, I think a question which comes along with the discussion of gaming always is, And given that there are enough parents around us, do they lead to addiction? Okay. And Susanna mentioned Fortnite, and I have a son who's addicted to Fortnite, and so it also worries me. Okay. So couldn't have a better group of people to tell you whether it could lead to addiction, does it lead to addiction, and if so, how does one handle it?
So we're going to have this conversation in 5 minutes and 8 seconds.
Yeah.
But there is another session this afternoon that is going to focus on the World Health Organization's claim that games are addictive, which we can talk in more depth about now. But I will start in sympathy. I also have a 14-year-old son who plays Fortnite. We should get them together.
Yes,
so
we talked about it yesterday.
Yeah, so they can play. So I will start by saying, though, that I do not believe that games are addictive, and I think that the statement made by the WHO was premature, and there's not enough research around it. However, there is addictive nature about games that are designed to be sticky, right? To have people want to come back and play more, and with certain types of games, to play for a long time, right? Not all games are designed to be played for an hour or two with your friends or by yourself. Sometimes you're playing a 5-minute game that they want you to come back to, right? Every day or repetitive. So in some case, it is good game design, right? I think that to declare that games can be addictive is a dangerous claim to make, that the WHO are, but I think there are helpful tips that can be given to parents to help their children manage their time and play game, and the parents won't feel guilty or angry that their kids are online as much as they are.
Kelly, would you like to respond to that?
Wow, okay. So for some context, I have been studying mental health and games for over 10 years. And so the short answer is no. I mean, it's a pretty complicated issue, but the understanding of using the term addiction is just so, to me, obscene. Because what you're talking about is a pattern of behavior and what someone is engaging in. You're not talking about ingesting of a substance, which is kind of the definition of what addiction is. And when you use the word addiction, it does drum up all of these schemas and ideas of what an addict looks like. And it's incredibly pejorative, and it just puts this pall over everybody who plays in a healthy way. And as a clinician, I've never seen someone addicted to games in the way that you might see someone addicted to alcohol or other substances. What you do see, however, and no one's arguing that this doesn't exist, but what you do see is problematic gaming. When someone is gaming to such an excess that it becomes like, it has a significant negative impact on their life. Maybe their grades are dropping. Maybe they don't hang out with their friends anymore. Maybe they're socially isolating. Maybe they're not wanting to be around their parents. Like, there's so many indicators. And typically, and I can't ever say with certainty in psychology, but 99.9% of the time, if someone's engaging in problematic gaming, it's because there's something else going on. They're getting something from that game that they're not getting from real life. Whether that is agency, whether that is achievement, whether that is connecting with their friends. I mean, that's such a huge part of it. So again, we'll go into that more, because that is a soapbox I could talk for a very long time on. But in terms of, are games addictive, or is usually compared to cocaine or some other hard drug? No, that's just patently no.
Great, I completely agree with you. In fact, when the WHO came out, I went and looked up literature to see what the circuits for addiction are, and does it really map up? And there's nothing at all to show so far. So I think we are on reasonably safe grounds. So the last 1 minute and 22 seconds, I'm going to open this up for a burning question on games. Okay, we'll decide whether it's burning. The panel will decide. So we'll take 3 questions and answer one burning one. So,
no cue to throw.
Yeah, no cue to throw. So the first 3 people who made it get to ask. Yeah.
Good afternoon to all the panel members. We enjoyed.
Just get to the question.
Yeah.
We are fine with, we don't need for the formality.
So university is the first place where home is the first university for a child. So in that sense, the children will start learning socio-emotional skills from the home itself. The way the parents behave, the environment in the house, will be the first source for learning of these skills by the children. Can we say that the learning of the skills through the games is the secondary source or artificial source?
Okay, question number 2. Quick. You have 12 seconds.
So we've spoken about the gaming and the SEL component. My question is, are teachers equipped to handle the assessment, the reports that come out of the assessment in terms of when a game data shows that child's is going on a negative impact or on a positive impact, how do teachers handle this in the class given the statistics and the report that the games generate?
In the spirit of fairness, we'll try and answer both questions, but no more. You can take one, and maybe Sean will take the other. Does he have a chance?
All right, I'll be super
Not a
fast.
third question?
Sorry.
Ah, 2 mean.
I was going to say, teachers do need to contextualize that the same way they would use novels that are serious. So there are a lot of really serious books that deal with subjects like suicide and family issues that children read all the time. And there's a ton of research on what's called theory of mind, where you are, you're hearing the inner monologue of the author of a story, right? And we play with those ideas as we read. So games are just a different type of media, right? So we have to be conscious of that with games, just as we do with, which may be more powerful because of agency, but certainly we need to be mindful of that with books and film.
Yeah, I think that another part of the question was around the data, and are teachers able to analyze that data properly? I think that the short answer is maybe, and it really depends. I think that I've seen some school districts. We're working with hundreds of schools and districts, and we've seen school districts spend a ton of time training their staff around these questions, equipping them to understand the data that's coming out of Classcraft, intentionally building the rubric within Classcraft with their teachers. So I think that as part of a thoughtful implementation, you can definitely get to a place where teachers are very well equipped to do that. I think that on the flip side of that, you can also run into a lot of situations where they aren't. Teachers aren't necessarily out of the gate equipped to understand, statistical data. Teachers aren't all really great at social emotional competencies themselves. As a teacher, I'm allowed to say that. I was a teacher. And so there's this idea around social emotional learning and just around education in general that one of the effective practices is called modeling, and it's you should be exhibiting the skills and knowledge that you expect your students to have. And so there's this question there around do teachers have these social emotional skills that we expect kids to be learning and putting forth? And the answer is not all of them do. And so, the teachers, not only are they not equipped to understand the data, they're not also equipped to actually teach that to kids because they don't have those skills themselves. And, I think that in general, adult humans don't all have the required skills that we're asking kids to develop, unfortunately. Maybe I'm just speaking for myself, I don't know.
We're going to have to put an end to this wonderful discussion, but thank you so much to all the panelists, thank you so much to the audience. Let's give everybody a big hand. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello. Hello. Ladies and gentlemen, the breakout sessions are now scheduled at 3:50, which is right now, so you may leave for the same. Thank you. So just everything was 1 hour. Yeah. everything is 1 hour, pushed by 1 hour.
Okay. Can we use one of your phones? My phone.
For ease of convenience, please remember everything is pushed by 1 hour.